I remember the exact second everything tipped, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, of how fast your heart is moving, of how there's no one left to blame but yourself. I had crossed into a place where pretending was no longer possible. There was no rush of excitement like I'd imagined. No sudden clarity. What I felt instead was weight. Heavy and undeniable. The understanding that this wasn't happening to me, I was choosing it. That realization settled deep, cutting through every excuse I'd been holding onto that I told myself I could still stop. I told myself this was just a moment of weakness, that moments pass if you let them. But my body didn't listen to logic. My thoughts scattered, clashing with everything I believed about myself. Loyalty. Control. Integrity. All of it felt fragile, like it could crack under the pressure of a single decision that he was close enough that I could sense him without looking. Presence does that, it announces itself without sound. I became painfully aware of how little space existed between us, how that distance had already been shrinking long before this moment. Nothing about it felt sudden anymore. It felt inevitable, and that scared me more than desire ever could. My mind raced ahead, playing out consequences I wasn't ready to face. Faces. Questions. Silence that would follow me everywhere. I thought about the life I'd built, the promises I'd made without ever imagining they'd be tested like this. I thought about how easy it would be to turn away and how hard it would be to live with the memory if I didn't. There was a split second where time seemed suspended. Where everything I was and everything I was about to become balanced on the same fragile edge. I waited for guilt to stop me. I waited for fear to win. Instead, I felt a strange calm, like something inside me had finally given up the fight. That surrender wasn't loud. It didn't feel reckless or wild. It felt deliberate. Quiet. Almost gentle. And that's what haunts me the most. I wasn't swept away. I stepped forward with open eyes. In that moment, I understood that crossing the line doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Like acceptance. Like allowing something you've been denying to finally take shape. The realization hit hard. Wanting had already changed me. This was just the confirmation that I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel powerful. I felt exposed, stripped of every excuse I'd used to protect myself from the truth. This wasn't about loneliness anymore. Or feeling unseen. This was about choosing to betray something solid for something uncertain and intoxicating. When it was over, there was no relief. Just a hollow space where certainty used to be. The silence returned, heavier than before, filled with everything I hadn't said and couldn't take back. I avoided thinking too far ahead because the future suddenly felt unstable, like one wrong step could collapse it entirely. That I didn't regret it the way people expect you to regret things. Not immediately. What I felt was confusion. A tangled mix of guilt and longing, of shame and attachment. That combination scared me. Regret can be clean. This was messy. That I realized then that I had changed the shape of my life without knowing what would replace it. There was no undoing what had happened, no version of the past where I could pretend this choice didn't exist. I had crossed into something permanent, even if no one else knew yet. The hardest part wasn't what I'd done. It was knowing I'd felt alive while doing it. That truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. It forced me to question everything, what I wanted, what I deserved, and whether comfort was the same thing as love. As I stood there, surrounded by the aftermath of a decision I could never unmake, one thought repeated itself over and over: this moment would follow me. Into my silence. into my relationship, into every version of myself that came after. And no matter how carefully I tried to move forward, would never be able to say I didn't know what I was doing when I let everything change. At some point, doubt stopped feeling like a passing thought and started feeling like a constant presence. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It just stayed there, quietly sitting in the back of my mind, growing heavier with every small thing I couldn't explain. I didn't wake up one day suddenly suspicious. It built itself slowly, piece by piece, until ignoring it felt more exhausting than facing it. The changes became harder to dismiss. It wasn't just delayed replies anymore. It was the way conversations felt forced, like they were happening out of habit instead of desire. There was a distance that couldn't be measured physically, but it was there in every pause, every short response, every moment that used to feel alive and now felt empty. I noticed how attention drifted, how presence became inconsistent. It felt like I was talking to someone who was there, but not really with me. Then came the shift in patterns. Things that used to be predictable suddenly weren't. Timings changed. Routines broke without explanation. There were new gaps in the day that didn't exist before. I tried not to read into it, but my mind kept connecting dots I didn't want to connect. It wasn't one big sign, it was a collection of small ones, aligning in a way that made it impossible to ignore. The phone became the biggest difference. It was always there, but now it felt protected. Turned away slightly. Picked up more quickly than before. Notifications that once went unnoticed were now answered instantly, but not around me. I never saw anything directly, nothing concrete, but the behavior itself was enough to make everything feel off. And the more I noticed it, the more aware I became of how deliberate it all seemed. That's when the overthinking began to take over. Not the casual kind, the kind that keeps you awake longer than you should be, replaying moments over and over, searching for meaning in things that used to feel normal. I started questioning everything. Every word, every delay, every change in tone. I hated it. I hated what it was doing to me, but I couldn't stop that. I kept asking myself the same questions I didn't have answers to. Was I imagining this? Was I turning nothing into something? Or was I the only one refusing to accept what was right in front of me? The worst part wasn't the suspicion, it was not knowing if it was real. Instead of confronting it, I tried to fix things in the only way I knew how. I gave more of myself. More attention, more effort, more patience. I tried to bring back the version of us that felt effortless. I started conversations, suggested plans, tried to close the distance that kept growing between us. I thought maybe if I showed enough care, enough consistency, things would shift back, but they didn't. That if anything, the more I tried, the more obvious the disconnect became. Responses felt distracted. Effort felt one-sided. It was like trying to hold on to something that wasn't resisting, but wasn't holding back either. That silent lack of effort said more than any argument ever could. There was a moment that stayed with me more than anything else. It wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no raised voices. Just something small that didn't sit right. A notification that appeared and disappeared too quickly. A name I didn't recognize. A reaction that felt slightly too controlled. It was nothing I could prove, nothing I could call out without sounding unreasonable. But it stayed in my mind longer than it should have. From that point on, something inside me shifted. The doubt was no longer quiet. It started demanding attention. Every new inconsistency added weight to it, making it harder to push aside. I found myself noticing things I would have ignored before. The way eye contact didn't last as long. The way conversations ended abruptly. The way presence felt temporary, like it could disappear at any moment. Sleep became difficult. Not because I was actively thinking all the time, but because my mind refused to rest. Even in silence, even in stillness, there was this constant feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't have proof, but I had a feeling I couldn't shake. And sometimes, that's worse. That I thought about asking directly. I really did. There were moments when the question sat right there, ready to be spoken. But every time, I stopped myself. Because once you ask, there's no going back. You either confirm your fears, or you expose your doubt. And I wasn't ready for either. So I stayed in that space. Not knowing, but suspecting. Not confronting, but observing. It was exhausting, living between what I felt and what I could prove. I wanted clarity, but I was afraid of what it would bring, and then, without warning, everything shifted. Not gradually this time. Not subtly that I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. It didn't feel like a choice when it finally happened. It felt like gravity. Like something set in motion long before I could name it, pulling me forward while my mind lagged behind, trying to catch up. I remember thinking that if I stopped now, everything would fracture. My marriage, the fragile balance we'd been pretending still existed. That thought alone was enough to keep me still, that I was aware of my husband more than anyone else in that moment. Not the man beside me, not my own racing thoughts, him. His presence pressed in from the edges, heavy and undeniable. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He watched. And in that watching, something inside me broke open and shut down at the same time that I told myself I was numb, but that wasn't true. I felt everything. I felt exposed in a way I had never experienced before, as if my inner life had been dragged into the open without my consent. I wasn't being touched so much as witnessed. Seen at my most vulnerable by the one person whose gaze still had the power to define me. My thoughts scattered. I clung to fragments, how the room sounded, how my breath betrayed me, how time stretched and warped until seconds felt unbearable. I searched my husband's face for something recognizable. Anger. Jealousy. Pain. Anything that would force this to stop. What I found instead was distance, a calm detachment that made my stomach twist. That detachment hurt more than outrage ever could have. It told me that whatever this was, it wasn't a mistake in his eyes. It was something he was allowing. Maybe even something he wanted to witness. The realization hollowed me out that I felt split in two. One part of me wanted to disappear, to rewind everything back to the quiet dissatisfaction I had once complained about. The other part stayed frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of being desired and condemned at the same time. I hated that I couldn't tell which feeling was stronger. That I tried to tell myself that this moment didn't define me. That people survive worse betrayals. But the truth was forming too clearly to ignore. I was crossing a line I could never uncross, and I wasn't doing it alone. That made it both easier and unbearable. My husband's silence became a presence of its own. It wrapped around me, suffocating and permissive. I wondered if he saw me as his wife anymore or as something else entirely. A test. A spectacle. Proof of something he didn't know how to name. That I felt ashamed of how quickly my body responded to attention after years of emotional starvation. Ashamed of the part of me that had wanted this before it happened. Ashamed that even now, a small, traitorous voice inside me whispered that I was finally being seen. That voice didn't last. It was drowned out by the weight of what this would mean afterward. The looks that would linger. The silence that would follow. The questions that would never be asked but would poison everything anyway. That I kept waiting for my husband to stop it. To say my name. To remind me who I was supposed to be. When he didn't, something inside me hardened. If he wouldn't protect the boundary, then maybe it had never mattered to him the way it mattered to me. That thought settled deep, painful and final, that I realized then that this wasn't about desire anymore. It was about power. About who held it and who had quietly surrendered it. I wasn't just betraying my marriage, I was being reshaped by it, stripped of the illusion that love alone defines loyalty. When it was over, nothing felt resolved. There was no release, no clarity. Just a heavy stillness, thick with consequences that hadn't arrived yet but already felt unavoidable. I couldn't meet my husband's eyes. I wasn't sure what I would find there if I did. That silence. I understood the worst part. This moment would never stay contained. It would echo forward into everything, every touch, every conversation, every quiet night beside him. What had happened wasn't just an act. It was a fracture. And I had felt it form, fully awake, unable or unwilling to stop it. After that, everything moved faster, even when it didn't look like it from the outside. Nothing about our behavior changed enough for anyone else to notice. We were still careful. Still controlled. Still staying just within the lines that made everything look normal. But internally, there was no balance left. Whatever hesitation I had before was fading, replaced by something stronger and harder to ignore. That I started thinking about him when he wasn't there. That was new. It wasn't just the moments we shared anymore. It was the anticipation of them. The replaying of small details in my mind. The way a single look could stay with me for hours, sometimes longer. I would catch myself drifting, losing focus on things that used to matter, pulled back into thoughts I knew I shouldn't be entertaining, and every time I noticed it, I told myself the same thing: stop, but I never did. We began finding more time to be alone. Not intentionally planned, not in ways that could be pointed out or questioned. It just happened. Small windows of time where everything else seemed to fade into the background. In those moments, the distance between us felt almost non-existent. Conversations became quieter. Slower. More deliberate. Words carried more weight, even when they were simple. And sometimes, we didn't speak at all. We didn't need to. That silence had become something else entirely. I knew where this was going. There was no confusion left, no uncertainty about what we were doing or what it meant. The only thing left was the choice to stop it, and I didn't. The first time it almost happened, I felt it building before either of us moved. It was in the way he looked at me, steady and unguarded. In the way I didn't look away. In the way the space between us seemed to shrink without either of us stepping forward. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I didn't want it, but because I understood it. Fully. Clearly. I knew exactly what crossing that line would mean. There would be no going back to pretending after that. No more harmless conversations. No more justifications that it would be real, and it would be wrong. That thought should have been enough. It should have stopped everything right there, but it didn't, because underneath the guilt, underneath the awareness of consequences, there was something else. Something louder. A feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time that I felt wanted, not out of habit. Not out of obligation. But in a way that was immediate and undeniable. It pulled at something in me I hadn't realized was still there, and in that moment, that feeling mattered more than anything else. The distance disappeared. There was no dramatic build-up, no words exchanged to make it official. Just a shift. A decision made without being spoken. His hand finding mine, not by accident this time. Mine not pulling away. Everything after that felt inevitable. I remember the pause right before it fully happened. That last second where I could have stopped it. Where I could have stepped back and chosen differently. I didn't. I let it happen, not because I was confused, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted it. That was the truth I couldn't hide from, no matter how hard I tried to soften it in my own mind later. That it wasn't a mistake, that it was a choice. Afterwards, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't filled with tension or anticipation. It was heavier, more real. We both knew what we had done, even if neither of us said it out loud. For a brief moment, I felt everything at once: excitement, guilt, relief, fear. That all blended together in a way that made it hard to separate one feeling from another. I didn't know which one I was supposed to focus on, so I focused on the one that felt strongest, the feeling of being alive. That's what it was. For the first time in a long time, something had broken through the numbness. Something had disrupted the routine, the predictability, the quiet emptiness I had gotten used to, and I held on to that feeling, even when I knew I shouldn't. Going home after that felt different in a way I couldn't ignore. Nothing had changed on the surface. The same walls, the same routine, the same person sitting across from me. But I wasn't the same anymore. That I noticed it in the way I avoided eye contact. In the way I responded just a second too late. In the way everything felt slightly out of place, even though it looked exactly the same. That I told myself I could manage it, that it didn't have to go any further, that it could stay contained, controlled, but that wasn't how it worked, because once the line was crossed, it didn't feel like a boundary anymore. It felt like something that had been holding me back. And now that it was gone, there was nothing stopping it from happening again, and it did, more than once. Each time, the hesitation faded a little more. The guilt became quieter, easier to push aside. The justification came quicker, more convincing. I stopped questioning it the way I had in the beginning. That I stopped pretending it wasn't what it was. It became something I relied on, not just him, but the way I felt when I was with him. The attention, the connection, the intensity of it. It filled a space I had ignored for too long, and once it was filled, I didn't want to go back to the way things were before. That's when I realized it wasn't just about a moment anymore. It wasn't just about crossing a line. It had become a part of my life. A secret one. And secrets like that don't stay hidden forever. I started noticing small things. Subtle shifts. The kind you wouldn't pay attention to unless you were already on edge. A question asked differently. A look held a second too long. A pause where there hadn't been one before. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was everything, but for the first time since it began, I felt something stronger than desire. I felt the possibility of it all falling apart, and I knew, deep down, that if it did, there would be no way to fix it.